suggested agenda for the personnel and finance tonight. And primary intent was to be able to take a look at what our 2013 budget was, what our actual experience in 2013 ended up, what type of variance we saw between plan versus actual, and how that compares to the 2014 budget going forward. This has kind of been an ongoing process. We started this a year or so ago, I think, but the spreadsheet's a lot longer. So the years for 2009, 10, 11, and 12, that data is also available. It's just that they don't make pages this big. But I do have, for the benefit of personnel and finance, there's the history for the years prior to. If you can just take one of those, Nick, and that's the.
Can we hand it around to someone else?
We'll just pass these the rest around.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, everybody should have a copy of the multi-year budget and review. Nick, did you bring? You've got.
I've got your
okay.
email, yeah.
Okay, that's all that counts. Okay, I'd like to just explain the structure of the document for the benefit of Nick and our new council members. And then we could go and discuss some of the observations that we have from being able to put this comparison together. The government accounting format that you'll see used by Renee and handed out at meetings, it doesn't really lend itself to a good comparative review. So what I've tried to do is all the data directly relates to the government accounting data, but I formatted it for ease of understanding and ease of comparison and to help in the decision process. Anything we do here is easily translatable back to the formal government accounting documents that Renee has. And during the last week or so, there's been several times where I've come in and I've just done a process check to make sure that I'm capturing it and representing it accurately. The first document I'd like to talk about is Plain City multi-year revenue by fund, and I think that's the first. There's an Excel worksheet that I gave members of personnel and finance that have two tabs in the lower left margin. The first tab is revenue, and coming across, the first column is headed account description, and then the second line says general fund. Well, inside the general fund, there's some basic categories of revenue, and then subcategories, as you would see, traceable back to the government accounting documents. An example is property, income, and other taxes. What you see right behind that is account number 110, 120, 130, 231. I've grouped them. So this would be traceable back to the sum of those four accounts. Did the same for shared taxes and permits. As you can see, there was 4 different accounts that rolled into that. Charges for services, that's basically waste pickup, period. Then we have fines, license, and permits. There's 3 different subcategories that roll into that. Earnings on investment. And then we have some miscellaneous accounts, and there's 4 total there. It's the sum of those that show what we have currently budgeted for general revenue fund income for 2014. And so we have budgeted $1,508,000. Our budget for 2013 was $1,560,000. And then our actual for 2013 was $1,740,000. So there was a pretty significant amount of revenue over budget. And you can see the percentage variance column, and basically that says the on property tax, the actuals were 113% of the plan.
Planned budget.
So if you look at just on the general fund income, we achieved income of 114% of plan, which it's a good thing. Typically, in a business environment, you don't want to see variation much more than plus or minus 10%, or people say, I could have used that money if I knew we were going to have it. So the goal is to try to be able to do a little bit closer planning. Several things occurred in 2013 that led to this, however. If you take a look at the comment section for property and income tax, the 2013 income tax revenues was greater than budget. I think as we went through 2014, we suspected that might take place, so we increased our budgeted revenue by $50,000, and that's for property and income tax. The next line, shared state funds. Local government funding was $7,000 greater than planned. Inheritance tax is something, you never know when somebody was going to die. We received an inheritance tax distribution of $82,000. So that is a lot of what made up the surplus of revenue over budget. But that's disappearing because the state legislature discontinued inheritance tax, so it will no longer be distributed. I don't know if they'll collect it, but it won't be distributed to the local levels. Correct?
They won't collect it.
So as you come on down, you see charges for services. That's basically trash collection. The cost and price was reduced in the 2014 budget compared to 2013 because we have a slight reduction in fee. Court fines, building permits, that was substantially lower than expected for 2013. Slight increase in interest, and that's based on two things. We were carrying a little bit more money in the checking account than planned because of the revenue, possibly a slightly higher interest rate, but not significant. But you see the percentages really swing, but when you look at real dollars, you're only talking like $400, difference. So you have to put things in proper perspective. So that's the general fund revenue. Comparison 2013 plan versus actual and what we have planned going forward for 2014. We have other sources of revenue, and that moves into the lower two-thirds of the worksheet. And the first is total street construction, maintenance, and repair. The actual for 2013 was $157,000. We budgeted $125,000. We did make a modest increase when we planned for the 2014 budget, and we've increased the budget from $125,000 to $140,000. And when we talk about the expense side of the equation and some of the issues as far as revenue here, it's really difficult to forecast exactly what you're going to get. So historic trends do come into play. Renee talks to the auditors, both counties, so there's a process that we use to try to get it as close as we can as possible.
And this is money coming from the county, not the state?
It could be the state for
County and state. It's for gas tax that we receive, registration fees that we receive from the county.
So we have, and right below that, we have total state highway. And we budgeted $10,000, received $12,000. For 2014, we have $11,000 planned. Parks and Recreation, you may have heard Kevin mentioned that our park revenue was far greater than what we'd had in prior years. We received $39,000. in 2013 versus the $27,000 budget. Our budget right now for 2014 is still $27,000. That may warrant some revisiting. We have a permissive estate, is that correct? That's a tax that,
You buy your license plates with a $5 fee.
okay. The actual was 24, the plan was 20. We did budget a modest increase for 2014 of 23,000.
You said that comes from a $5 fee for a license plate? We get $24,000 annually from that $5?
Well, off each license plate. Yeah.
It just seems like a lot of license plates. Okay.
Police, we budgeted 324,000, and the actual was 346,000. And this is made up of 290,000 was property tax, 56,000 was the other, which could be grants, fines, things of this sort. We did budget a fairly modest amount for 2014, and we may want to consider some increase in the projected revenues in the 2014 budget. So some of these are an explanation, and some of them are like notes to ourselves as we move into the year and start doing budgeting, because our first real milestone is to come up with final appropriations for 2014. Total sewer capital, well, I jumped down too far. Pool bond retirement, actual was 160, the budget was 145. There was a situation where they collected too little in the first year, so they've collected a little bit more. The city used general fund money to help cover. It was just that the income and expenses were out of phase with each other, so we had to cover that gap. They collect a little bit more, and so that's why we had a surplus to eventually restore to the general fund. So that was intentional. Total sewer capital, that's basically Copperfield, and it was to build out on Copperfield. We had planned 50,000, received 174. Now, the plan for 50 was you'll find maybe every once in a while a house being built, call it infill, on an existing lot within, the residential community. It could be a business. So it was a fairly small amount that we budgeted. Didn't know what was going to happen, but the village actually approached and recruited M.I. Homewood to move forward. So it was by actions of the village and a combination of that, a discount on tap fee that was offered as an incentive, and M.I. Homewood suspecting that there might be a slight upturn in the housing market. So that's how that was realized.
Bob, why don't we project any income from that in this year?
At this point, they bought all their sewer taps for Copperfield.
Okay.
So that's a build out. The Oak Grove had final planning or approval hasn't been set, and when we did the original budget last fall, we weren't sure how it was going to work out. There was a point about within the last 18 months that Oak Grove broke off discussions with the village and said they were no longer interested. So until we saw that we were really moving forward, we were hesitant. Even with approval of the zoning and giving them the green light, the revenue from tap fees will be market driven, and it'll be, as they build, they'll buy the tap fees. So it's still impossible to tell what's going to happen.
Well, they had the green light back in what, 06?
Yeah, they did.
07, and they were built.
Right.
So it's kind of hard. We don't plan for it if we don't have it, type of thing. So.
Yeah, so we really need to see it in hand before it can be counted.
And Homewood wanted to get that 10% discount, so that's why they bought all theirs.
The water operating cost, we had budgeted 435, and the actual was 422 for revenue. We had a very wet year. Pool revenues were down because it rained a lot, and people didn't water a lot because it rained a lot. So the revenues were down. We budgeted 425 for 2014. On the swimming pool revenues, like I just mentioned, they were down, but they were still good. Just short of 94,000. We had budgeted 120, which was what the revenue had been the year prior. This coming year, for 2014, we're budgeting 95,500. There was the novelty of the first year. There was also, we had an extremely hot summer 2 years ago. So it was a combination of pent-up demand, favorable weather, and things went pretty good. We have been hesitant to budget too much revenue for the pool. And the reason is if we took a look at the original prospectus put together by the engineering firm, the projections were that at some point that the village should probably plan to subsidize it operations, which so far we haven't. But that was their analysis, that it would not necessarily be self-sustaining. We've been lucky, it has been, but it's not a guarantee.
What happens a lot of times with pools that are owned by the municipality, so a lot of times they get sold, so because they're drained, they become drained.
Hopefully our residents aren't going to Dublin for their pools.
I think it stopped, but they were.
And what is our annual operating cost of the pool? What do we have to make to break even there?
I can tell you.
In 2013, we spent 93,390, and we took in 93,990.
Oh, okay.
So we made $600 to the good there. Yeah, it's better than $600 minus, so. I want to address the sewer fund real quick, because it looks like
Sure.
we took in 23,000 more, and we did, only because we had allowed a couple companies to bring their sludge, and we made some money on that. And we made 39,000, but we have now since stopped that because we felt like some of the waste that they were bringing here was causing our permit to change a little bit, that we were not allowed to accept that. So, however, we're going to get some more money because we had a company that refused to pay us, and then Paul sent in a letter, and they are now down to around 15,000. So we should collect that 15 this year and be done. Yeah. But we were down almost 15,000 on our revenue, just over our charges for service.
And now, we handed out a document just before we started the discussion. This is the same picture, but it's revenues for 2012, 11, 10, and 9. So you have lots of history, and but history's not necessarily the only predictor that you want to use. But you will see that there's been years we've had more revenue, years we've had less revenue. So, but these are the tools that we use in the budgeting process. Before we move on, I'd like to ask, are there any questions by personnel and finance concerning the revenue analysis? Okay.
So I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Do we have some kind of, I mean, are there formulas that we use for some of these things? For example, I'm looking at the property income tax, the first line.
Mm-hmm.
We received 1.2 last year, but this year we're budgeting $100,000 less than that. I mean, what?
Where you're going to see the difference is the income tax. We budgeted in 2013 $1 million. We took
Yep.
in $1,148,000, which is
Where are you at?
that's the income tax. That's
Oh, okay.
grouped with other property tax, things like that. I'm just telling you, in that where that marked difference is your income tax. So we bumped it up this year to $1,050,000. But I will tell you that the prior year, if you're looking
It was 1 million.
$1,057,000.
Well, we have 1 million in 2012, 1,122,000.
Well, okay, that you're looking at the overall. I'm talking about income tax.
Okay, yeah.
I mean,
So this groups a number of those categories together.
Okay.
Now, maybe this will answer your question. We did increase by 50,000.
By 50, I see that, right? Yeah.
But we did that, but before we even knew what the fourth quarter results were going to be. So,
We did this in October.
so we have to have a preliminary budget ready, and we did it without the benefit of knowing when we were going to close the year.
Okay.
So now, the budgeting process is the preliminary budget in the first quarter, we then move to make it a final budget. So that's going to be one of our activities as far as personnel and finance. And it gives us the opportunity to revisit some decisions made in the fourth quarter based upon newly gained information.
I got you.
Any other questions on income? Okay. The next tab on the Excel worksheet was appropriations. And basically the same concept was used. Here we track planned expenses, actual expenses for 2013. We show what the variance was, plus or minus. And then we show what our planned expenses are, or better said, appropriations for 2014. If you take a look just from a macro perspective, items that we plan to expend using funds from the general fund, we only spent 86% of what was budgeted. If you scroll down, you'll see that the next set of expense categories, we spent about 72% of what was budgeted. And there's some metrics that I put way at the bottom of the second page, and it shows police expenditures were 94% of budget. So Chief Hill managed the police department with funds about 5% less than what he was authorized to use. If you look at lands and buildings, village administration, water and sewer operating, we were in the mid-70s% of budget. And something happened in April. We had a change in village administration. Kevin moved into the job and was going through a learning curve, and he felt it was most prudent to take a very cautious and conservative approach as he got a better understanding of his responsibilities and the various issues that came into play. So we saw a very conservative expenditure pattern for non-police activities. Jim, on the other hand, was able to be a lot closer because he's had the years of experience. So
Plus, Kevin was walking into a budget that was done, he didn't take due. Someone else did, so he was trying to manage that.
But I think the word is learning curve and a very conservative approach. And he'd rather err on the a tight fiscal management side than to have overspent. So coming down and using a similar approach as we did for revenue, for security and personal property, and this is funds that come from the general fund for police. And in 2013, we had budgeted 374. The actual was 367. For 2014, we budgeted 372. Didn't offer a comment because, remember, like I said, if it's plus or minus 10%, if it's within those boundaries, it's probably not something you overly want to get worried about. It's the outliers outside of the plus and minus 10. As we refine the process, we might want to start using plus and minus 5, but we're not quite there yet. Total basic utilities, that's basically trash and electric. And 96% of budget was spent. Our 2014 budget's the same as what we had planned for 2013. The mayor's expenses were only 75% of what was budgeted. So part of that was conservative spending and elimination of cell phones. Total legislative activities was 95% of budget. We planned 69,000, we spent 66. This coming year, we're planning 70,000.
What does that entail?
That's basically council.
Okay.
Council and Mr. Lafayette.
Yeah.
Yes.
Clerk treasurer, we planned 71,000, only spent 64. We're planning 71.2, which is the same. Again, two factors came into play there: elimination of cell phone, and Renee chose not to use the vacation buyout option. Lands and buildings, this is where the conservative approach that I was explaining with the new administrator comes into play. The budget was 352, we only spent 279, which was about 80%. This coming year for 2014, we have planned expenditures of 334,000. I know we've debated this back and forth. The clock tower, not sure how, we know we've got an expense, and I've said, I see it the same as lands and buildings. I mean, it is village property, and so I'm seeing that as maybe something that we're gonna have to figure out how to budget. There may be alternate sources of revenue or income, but it's truly part of the village lands and building assets. Property tax collection, this is the fee, I believe it's an auditor, for the auditor's office. We budgeted 9, spent 8, and we're budgeting 7,500 for the upcoming year. State auditor, budgeted 10, spent 8,000. And that cost was reduced through a competitive bidding for an auditor service. Income tax administration, we did the subpoena day, so the total cost was planned at 45,000, budgeted at 45. We probably will not do a subpoena day in 2014. The budget's 38,000, so we're planning a decrease in expenses. 2013 budget for general government was 194,000. We spent 128, and going forward for 2014, we have 102,000 planned. Other finances, other use for financing, we have 100,000 planned. That's a reserve set aside for the signalization of the South Jefferson and the West Avenue Perry Pike intersection. That's what we've been told will be our liability to the state.
Do we have salaries built in? I don't see it as one particular
It's broken
thing,
in.
so it's probably broken into its respective departments?
Yep.
Correct. And the salary, we have wages and we have fringes, and those are called out in detail, so.
In my report,
Yep,
that
and-
you'll get from me, the appropriation summary, you'll get each line item broke out.
Okay.
Again, this is intended to help you better understand, make comparisons. The detail, you have to train your eye to be able to work with those government accounting worksheets, and but the information is captured. What you see in the second column, that's the account numbers that coincide with the account numbers that you would find on the government accounting documents. So we do try to provide information for cross-reference. Okay, moving down to non-general fund expenditures. Street construction, we planned 160,000, actual was 110. Going into 2014, we're planning 176,000. State highway, we budgeted 20, spent 10. We're looking at 31,000 for 2014. Part of that, I believe, is carryover, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay. And speaking of salt, it looks like, looking at the expenses, we had 3 salt orders that we paid for since the last council meeting. So do we have salt?
We've had 4, we have salt right now.
Okay.
We've got
Some of the
3
salt
loads.
you're gonna see on the report is water plant salt.
Okay.
Yeah.
The
Okay.
2 orders were road salt.
Moving on down, we have total municipal park and playground, that's account 2041. The plan was 100,000, our actual expenditures was 3,500, and this warrants a little bit of an explanation. The expenditure of $3,500 was for fire rings in the campgrounds. The 100,000 is really dedicated fund based upon green space fees paid by developers when new houses have been built in past years. And we carried in the appropriations so we don't lose visibility of it, but it's really earmarked for parks. There's a lot of people that feel that it should be in the southern part of the village because that's where the revenue came from when the new houses were built. Be it as it may, a good portion of it was used for Pastime Park a couple years ago, about $80,000.
So this money is generated, for example, I live in Darby Estates. So when they built our area, there is no green space there. And so the homeowners there gave up green space so the village could get this money?
The homeowners didn't.
Well, the homeowners obviously had no option in the
The
matter.
builder and the city, during the zoning process, negotiated green space funds in lieu of green space,
Right.
with the money going into a reserve account to get a park at a future point in time. So that's why we don't just turn around and use it for plays or streets. I mean, it's intended for park use.
And do we still give developers this option?
No.
There's I
They
think
pay
a park,
$500 fee per home
yeah, it's a flat fee now.
now. I mean,
So basically we force them to exercise this option instead of them providing green space
it was their choice.
It was,
It was the
because
developer's
we
choice.
allowed them a choice.
Correct, yeah, exactly,
it was
they
part of
had a
the
choice,
negotiating
yeah.
process.
I mean, obviously you can understand from my questions, I think that's a poor thing to do from a village standpoint.
That's why I was
That we
looking
don't
at
provide green space within the homeowners associate or homeowners area itself. So for example, with Oak Grove going forward,
It's got green space.
it's got green space.
Yeah, actually, what you just shared was one of the observations that came out of the comprehensive plan that led to recommended changes to the planning and zoning ordinances in the 2006 to 2007 timeframe, and that's when the option that the developers had previously was taken away.
Okay, good.
See, that all was done before any of us, but then we were responsible to oversee those dollars. And we have a committee put together to look at a park in the southern portion. We were looking at the same property that they were looking at for the elementary
Right.
school, and so that's
To
how
share
that.
with. I
To
mean,
share, yeah, but then,
Well, some of that's still there, but
Yeah, but the property owner doesn't sell.
I've heard talks of her, yeah.
Okay. Next is total parks and recreation, and this is the campgrounds. The budget was 24,000, the actual was 21. And that's expenses. We did have an increase in revenue, so the budget for 2014 is 35,000. And kind of looking, I have a little footnote over here that park plans requested for 2014. I believe we've asked the Parks Committee for some plans. So just because you have money doesn't mean you want to go spend it. You have to have a plan to make sure it's put to the best use. Recreation and park fee, those are carryovers. We have nothing budgeted, nothing expended, but these have been appropriations that have been carried forward for several years, and wanted to flag this to the attention of the park committee as well.
The $3,500 is now the $500, we've separated it out.
So that's
That's the
the
$500 per house fee that we receive for.
so that's for the 7 houses that we have been built by MI Homewood so far this year.
because we didn't have anything set aside for parks. There was nothing going into a park fund to keep it going in improvements, and so that was separated out. The fee was pulled out so that the park has its own income.
Okay. The next two categories are police department related. funds that were unused and basically looking to ask Chief Hill to, figure out if he wants to use it this year, and when we get ready to do final appropriations, factor it in. Permissive tax, the budget last year was 50,000. We didn't spend anything. And we have a budget this year of 90,000. Is that correct? So, again, this goes back to two things. Kevin learning his job, and also we're looking to get a plan developed which prioritizes needs for the purposes of 2014 and beyond, because the permissive fund, the total state highway and street construction, there's funds available, but not to do everything, not to satisfy all our needs. So we're looking to see, just kind of pray to it. What needs it the worst? What's the least? What's the expected expenditures? And then start to schedule projects based upon the appropriations.
And some of those funds can only be used certain ways.
State highway, yeah.
So what is exactly the permissive motor vehicle license tax? What is that appropriation exactly? I mean,
That's-
what you're talking, it would fall under street construction and repair, but that's not the case?
Because we receive that money through the state, so it has to go into a fund all by itself. And that's that $5 fee that everybody pay, and that's where that revenue comes from that fund. And so that money can only be used for roadways and right-of-ways.
The next area is total police, and this is the portion of the police budget that's not funded by the general fund. And we talked about this. This is fringe benefits and supplies. The budget was $251. The actual was, 351. The actual was 318. The budget going in for this year is slightly higher at 360,000. And we had a fund balance of 55,000, which is carryover. So the third column you see where it says 1 January fund balance, that's unused funds from
Understand.
last year that have moved into the 2014 timeframe. The clock, we have a $1,500 fund, but we're going to need a lot more than $1,500. The pool retirement bond, the plan, the budget was 143, the actual was 143. The appropriations for 2014 is 141. We have a carryover of 17. This goes back to the topic of the revenue from the pool bond being slightly out of phase with the debt for the pool bond. So, water capital, the budget was 253. The actual was 72,000. The appropriations for this coming year are 314,000. The carryover is 315,000. Probably the most significant area here is there was a 2010 report, professional report done that assessed both water towers, and there was a recommendation that we needed to move forward. And funds have been extremely tight. As you know, I think the bids are due in within a week or so, and I think the opening's before mid-February. So we're not sure how much that's going to amount to. It could approach $200,000 because it's both the inside and the outside of the water towers. And it's been some time since, I think the south, or the west tower has been painted, but only on the outside. And everything else, it's been an extremely long period of time since the last preventive maintenance. They've been inspected, but we've got to protect our capital. The water capital budget was 149. We spent 147.
Yes.
We're planning 125 for 2014. We have a carryover of 126,000. Really, that's basically
Yes. Kevin, there was
one
something
half
earlier.
of the wastewater treatment plant
That's good.
debt
We'll
service.
do it next time. Okay.
That comes from capacity fee, and the other half basically is going to be the surcharge that we've just put in place.
No problem. No problem. All right,
Um,
see you in a bit.
Park Trust, I'm not, I know we've had that before, but, it's,
Can't spend it.
okay, and what's it for? It was with the deed for the park?
It was somebody that willed us money, but then put a stipulation on that we couldn't spend the 5,000, but we could spend the
All the
interest.
interest, okay.
Off some of it.
Okay. Water operating, the budget was 498, the actual was 376. The plan for 2014 is 484,000. The carryover was 120. Again, this goes back to the fact that Kevin needed to determine, what the priorities were as far as the water operations. So operations, we budgeted 636, actual was 499. The plan for next year, or for 2014, is 586, and we have a fund balance of 210,000. One item of note there, there was about 5 months of 2013 that we were understaffed in the sewer plant operations. And that was because of personnel changes. And it took time to, if there was a resignation or a termination, time to solicit and get somebody interviewed and brought on. So there was about a 5-month period that we were short-staffed in the water treatment plant. Pool, the budget was 120,000. The actual was 93. The budget for 2014 is 95,000, and the fund balance is 111,000. As we mentioned, the cost and the revenue were just about equal for 2014 or 13. Excuse me. So that's basically the 2013 in review of budgeted expenses versus actual, and how that compares to what our preliminary budget for 2014 looks like. Are there any questions on the appropriation side or the expense side?
Yeah, I have a few, just
Okay.
so I understand this going forward. It appears to me, Bob, and certainly correct me if I'm reading it wrong, that for calendar year 14, we've budgeted $4 million in appropriations. Total.
I didn't,
Yeah.
is that right?
Second
Okay.
page.
I didn't, okay.
And then when we look at our revenue for the same period, we are predicting $3 million. So, to me, that says, I'm not an accountant, obviously, that we're $1 million short.
And if you look at pure cash flow, you're correct, but we do have a general fund carryover.
Balance of 1.5?
Yeah.
Okay. And is that, and again, am I missing something in to say then if we go forward, nothing changes and everything kind of works out as we've predicted here, that we will have a general fund by the end of, well, by this time next year of only 500,000?
No.
Do you understand what I'm saying? Is this
Yeah,
shortfall of $1 million coming from the general fund?
I'm not sure.
Do you understand what I'm asking though?
I look at the general fund appropriations and the general fund revenue. 1.5 is in the revenue. If you go down to the one, basically the general fund expenses for 14 is 1.5. We're outside $30,000.
Okay. So you're looking at the 4,078,000?
That's right.
I try to go fund by fund because that's how we need to look at it. I mean, just because the street fund, if you look at the street fund
You're aware of it.
appropriations, 193,000, okay?
Yep.
All right, then if you go up and see what we're gonna spend in street, we're going to spend 140.
Okay.
So it can never, our revenue plus our carryover can never exceed our appropriations.
Okay, I understand that, but I guess at the end of the day, when we budgeted to spend $4 million, but receive $3 million, Where am I missing?
Well, like in the municipal park and playground, it says we're gonna spend 113,000. There is no revenue source coming in on that to back that up. So the 113 is when we're gonna spend our fund balance right there, if we spend it.
Right, so I mean, I understand that, we're not receiving a revenue for that, yet we're still spending 100K plus to pay for that, which to me is unsustainable.
That's the money that we receive from the park, the fees that you're talking about,
But that's been budgeted into the revenue.
No, because we're not gonna receive any revenue. There's no revenue for 14 for that. That's no longer in effect. So we have $113,000 sitting in a muni park playground fund that has no revenue coming in it. It has money sitting there in a balance that we can spend only on parks type thing. It
Okay.
has no revenue for that.
Okay, I guess I do get it, I
Yeah.
get what you're saying. But ultimately, we've lumped everything in that we're going to spend. Parks, obviously that example not included, we're gonna spend $4 million. Give or take.
We're not going to spend that $100,000 in the green space. We may not spend it, but it's appropriated.
Because if you don't appropriate it, you can't spend it.
Okay, I understand what you're saying.
And some of the other funds fall in a similar situation.
At least
Kinda
$1 million.
Well, like the water sewer capital, you're looking at almost $430,000 that has technically right now no revenue source behind it. But it shows an appropriation because that's a fund balance. That's money that we have sitting aside that we collected from tap fees this year.
Okay. All right, I
So between
understand that.
there's $500,000.
This is where the government accounting formats make it very difficult to explain in a public environment. And that's why we try to format it this way for discussion purposes. But there are rules. If it's dedicated for specific use, you can't use it for something else.
Okay, I understand that.
Because if you, on that one, where it shows expenses for 314,000 for total water and total sewer, 125. And if you go up to the revenue, you're gonna see 0.
Okay. Okay, all right, so it's just gonna be a learning curve for me to figure out this. So, I mean, obviously, at the end of the day, when we put a budget together, our concern is that we're going to receive more than we spend. Right? I mean,
Hopes. That's, yes.
right.
Right.
So where is that calculation?
I don't think I brought that. We have the basic budgeting document that we'll be bringing forward into the subsequent meetings. This was intended to help offer information as to plan versus actual.
Okay, well,
We'll
I'll
into
just
the
get
real
up to
planning
speed eventually.
Yeah, this is reference, this is not how, this is for reference and comparative use. When we actually get into trying to update the final appropriations for 2014, this may be beneficial for personnel and financing and council to use for reference purposes, but our budgeting decisions will be made using this set of budget documents consistent with what we've used in prior years as well.
Okay, all right. So it's
If
just,
you did not get that, we'll make sure you have it.
okay. Couple other questions, Bob, I'm sorry to pound it. When we take in more than we spend, do we have a savings?
That's the fund balance. That's what.
That's the 1.5 we see.
Yes,
Okay,
correct. When you look at the general fund, yeah.
all right. And what is a vacation buyout?
If an employee has, say, 5 weeks of vacation, the way our personnel policy is set up, although I don't think anybody gets 5 weeks, but they decide that I'm not going to be able to use that, I could use the extra money, they make a request to the administrator or council and say, can I just cash out?
It could be a big hit at the end of the year.
Actually, there are limitations set up in our personnel policy, so you may be able to accrue X number of vacation hours, but there's only a certain amount that you can use in a buyout scenario. So we're protected against an onslaught of such requests that could really shake the foundation of our budgeting process.
I understand.
Any other questions?
Not yet.
And I'll share with you like my document, and you can maybe look with this and see where they kind of coincide with each other.
Yeah, it's obvious I got a lot more to get up to speed, so okay. I won't try not to ask any
Oh,
more
not at
questions, so
all.
I've seen
Me.
most of it.
Here, Connie.
I think that's it for now.
Okay. The item 2 on the agenda, and I'm going to try to go through this quickly. I tried to put together some activities for the Personnel and Finance Committee as we move through the course of 2014. And I just want to bring them up and then maybe solicit some feedback between now and our next council meeting. We've talked, for the benefit of Personnel and Finance, a comparison with 2013 actuals and plan. But do we want to schedule a work session and invite all of council and dedicate a walkthrough of that for the benefit of everybody? So I would simply raise the question, and that if you think that there's interest in that, I would ask that you express that to the President Pro Tem, who would be the person calling the special meeting. We need to work on the final appropriations for 2014. And what's our target date there, Renee?
March 31st.
Okay.
Has to be filed by March 31st.
Okay. So I see a couple meetings as we fine tune the final appropriations for 2014. A couple meetings of Personnel and Finance, and then an adequate amount of time to work with the balance of council to reconcile recommendations from Personnel and Finance and see if council has any questions regarding those recommendations. We want to start developing what we call a multi-year capital improvement plan. Historically, and because of budget, just tight dollars, we find ourselves constantly in a situation where an unplanned expense comes up, and it's always an I gotcha, and it creates pain through the whole organization. So basically, a capital improvement plan would be basically looking at your capital assets, understanding what their useful life cycle is, and then accruing money on a planned basis through time in accordance with that capital improvement schedule. So when the schedule says it's time to replace a dump truck at, say, 15 years, the money's there. It would have been planned for and accrued. So I would look to start that process in the first quarter. I would also look to wrap it up probably by no later than June 1st. And again, this really needs to be a multi-year plan. The June 1st target for the capital improvement plan is important because I see that as being used as input for our 2015 budgeting process. It's going to be new. We actually had the beginnings of a capital improvement plan in the alternate budget that was brought forward in the fourth quarter of last year. When the police levy failed, that budget was set aside, so capital improvements was put off. But capital improvements planning is critical, and we think we need to bring that forward. Sometime after June 1st, we'd look to set a schedule to start developing the budgeting for 2015. That would include a review and approval process with council. Ideally, the goal is to have that ready to go sometime in the October, November timeframe. That's all I had, and again, I would solicit your feedback with respect to these suggestions, the timing, probably the most important if a deep review of the 2013 and 14 budgets would be beneficial to our new council members. Let Kevin know we can consider a date where we could dedicate a meeting solely to that purpose, where we would have the government accounting standard documents, but we would have this for reference. So it'll be a way to help you understand the correlation between the two as well.
I just think we should make that recommendation to council as a finance committee.
Okay.
Got another question.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I see what we're going to do as far as from a finance perspective. I know the committee is called Personnel and Finance, so on the personnel end of it, what is our role?
We've actually worked with a consultant, and we updated the new personnel policy that came out of personnel finance and was brought forward to council last year, I believe.
Yes.
The personnel issue would come from your chief and administrator about whether or not they need to increase in personnel, if they want personnel changes to their sick leave, vacation leave, or vacation, stuff like that.
But I
Or
had
if you have recommendations.
I did have a
Yeah.
question actually, because I was reviewing a hierarchy and it had to do with you, Renee. Actually, I noticed that you were directly under the mayor, which, and again, this is kind of what I do for a living. You're
She's-
her supervisor?
She's my supervisor, yes. I
Yeah.
answer to her, but technically the 6 of you are my bosses.
Okay. Well, if I were to sit down in my line of work and review, what's this business doing, one of the things that kind of stood out to me with that eye was why Mr. Vaughn, for example, wasn't your supervisor since he was in the office 8 hours a day. You're obviously, somewhere else or most of the time, where he's directly there and can supervise her on an eye-to-eye basis. I was curious why that wasn't the case. I mean, in my expert, I would assume you supervise him. I get it. We can't be, well, we can let him supervise himself. He's trustworthy. No,
Thank
I mean,
you.
I'm kidding. But, to me, why is Renee not supervised by Kevin since he's there?
I think the 3 of us answer to the mayor, and we're all on it, like how that organizational chart works.
Yeah, I saw that, and that's kind of what stuck out to me, which, if I were advising a company, I would say, that's what I would ask. Why? Why is Renee not being supervised by
The Ohio
Mr. Vaughn, who is the...
allows it to go 2 ways.
Right, we've obviously made that decision. I'm not saying it's illegal in any way, but we've made the decision as an entity to have you, who is not present, supervise her when Mr. Vaughn is present. It just didn't make a lot of sense to me, and I'm just looking for why. From an organizational
I don't
standpoint.
recall. the
I
way
kind of
was.
viewed it as checks and balance, really. I mean, Renee's responsible for our financial responsibilities, and Kevin could be signing purchase recs, and, there's a need
Check
to
and
make.
balance.
Yeah, exactly. That's the way I've always viewed it. It may not be the proper view, but that's how I viewed it, Nick.
I'm not saying that there's anything done incorrectly. I was just curious why.
Well, they're all salary, so they're,
Right, I get that.
she could supervise him, or,
She could, yeah.
so.
Yeah, that would be fine. Obviously, I just assumed that, I've already said in the sense that he's there, it made more
Because I
sense to
oversee
me.
the money, they don't want Kevin or Jim saying, hey, I want this. Technically, I have to go through the mayor to do that. She is the ultimate that we often go to.
An example in the fire department, if from operations perspective, they need to make a purchase requisition has to be put together, approved, it goes to the fiscal officer, who then signs a purchase order. So again, it's kind of the checks and balance is the way I viewed it. And at this point, it's served us pretty well so far.
And I'd have to go back and review the Ohio Revised Code.
Now, I've always remembered it this way.
No, I know that there's nothing illegal per se about the way you set it up. I guess I was just curious as to what the rationale was.
Specifics.
Yeah, I don't think the revised code would probably speak to that.
I think we're going to need to adjourn from the Personnel and Finance meeting. It's time for regular council meeting. So Mayor, I'll turn it over to you.